The penthouse was less a home and more a mausoleum to success. It occupied the entire top floor of a glass needle that pierced the city's skyline, a monument to Julian Vance's rapacious ambition. Every surface was either Italian marble, polished chrome, or stark white leather, curated to create an atmosphere of untouchable power and profound silence. It was a silence that buzzed with the hum of 1,000 invisible systems, climate control, security, network servers, but held no human warmth. It was a gilded cage, and Alara Vance, his wife of 10 years, was its most prized and most ignored possession. Julian moved through this space not as a husband, but as a king inspecting his domain. He was a man forged in the crucible of corporate warfare, a titan of industry whose photograph graced magazine covers under headlines like the Midas of Tech. He saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities, acquisitions and mergers. Alara, with her quiet grace and background in art history, was, in his private calculus, the perfect asset, beautiful, poised, and utterly unintrusive. She was the elegant frame for his masterpiece of a life. Now, 7 months pregnant with their first child, she was the vessel for his legacy, the final jewel in his crown. The signs of the brewing storm were subtle at first, like the shift in barometric pressure before a hurricane. There were the late nights, explained away with the casual wave of a hand, and the murmur of board meetings or investor calls. His excuses were thin justifications, corporate jargon meant to deflect and dismiss. Then came the scents. His cashmere sweaters, once smelling only of his sharp, expensive cologne and the sterile air of his office, began carrying a foreign fragrance, a sweet, cloying cherry blossom scent that clung to the fibers like a disease. It was a cheap, synthetic sweetness that had no place in their world of bespoke perfumes and natural oils. His behavior grew colder, more dismissive. Conversations became monologues on his part, or worse, interrogations. "Did you confirm the catering for the gala? Has my suit been collected?" He looked at her, but his eyes passed straight through, seeing only a functionary, a household manager. The man who had once quoted poetry to her in the moonlit gardens of Lake Como was gone, replaced by a corporate gladiator who had forgotten how to remove his armor. Alara felt herself becoming a ghost in her own life, her presence fading against the stark, white walls of their home, her voice swallowed by the cavernous living space. The discovery, when it came, was not a dramatic confrontation but a quiet, digital desecration. Julian had left his personal laptop open on the monolithic marble island in the kitchen, a rare lapse in his otherwise meticulous routine. He was in the shower, the hiss of water a distant soundtrack to her world-shattering. A notification bloomed on the screen, an email from a high-end furniture store. The subject line read, "Delivery confirmation, your new beginning." Her heart gave a painful lurch. They had not ordered any new furniture. With a hand that trembled, she touched the trackpad. The email opened to reveal an itemized list, a king-sized bed, a Parisian vanity, a set of silk sheets. But it was the delivery address that made the air leave her lungs in a painful gasp. It was their weekend estate in the Hamptons, the one he had insisted they close up for the season. Attached to the email, for confirmation, was a chain of previous messages. Her eyes scanned the text, the words blurring through a film of sudden, hot tears. The messages were from a woman named Chloe. The tone was intimate, giddy, filled with plans. "I can't believe it's finally happening, Jay," one read. "Getting rid of all her old, stuffy things is the perfect start. A clean slate for us." Another message, from Julian himself, was the final, devastating blow. "She won't be a problem. She'll get the penthouse and a generous settlement. Consider it a severance package for a decade of service. The house, the real home, will be ours. Severance package. Service." The words were clinical, brutal. He wasn't just having an affair, he was liquidating an asset. He was terminating her position. The email chain went further, revealing not just infidelity but a calculated, callous plan to replace her, to erase her existence from the life she had helped build. This wasn't a mistake. It was a corporate takeover of her heart. The initial shock was a physical thing, a wave of ice water that sluiced through her veins, leaving her numb and breathless. She sank onto a cold leather stool, one hand protectively, instinctively, covering her swollen belly. The child within her kicked, a small, insistent flutter, a reminder of the future he was so casually discarding. For a long, silent moment, she was adrift in a sea of grief, the roaring in her ears drowning out the distant sound of the shower. She saw the future he had planned for her, the tragic, divorced wife, the subject of pitying whispers at charity galas, a cliché he had written and cast her in without her consent. She pictured Chloe, whose profile she found with 2 clicks of the trackpad, young, ambitious, with the hard, predatory beauty of a raptor, preening in her home, sleeping in her bed, living her life. The image was a lit match dropped into the gasoline of her grief. Sorrow, she realized, was a luxury. It was a passive state, a victim's indulgence. And she would not be a victim. Something shifted deep within her. The ice in her veins did not melt. It hardened. The grief did not vanish. It was burned away by a pure, clarifying anger. It was a cold, hard resolve that settled in her bones, a steel that had always been there, inherited from a long line of women who had weathered wars and poverty and heartbreak without shattering. Julian saw her as a piece of art, a decorative object. He had forgotten that the most beautiful things in nature were often the most dangerous. He had mistaken her stillness for weakness, her silence for submission. It was a fatal miscalculation. The presence of her unborn child was the ultimate catalyst. This was no longer just about her own dignity. It was about her child's legacy. She would not allow her son or daughter to be born into a story of betrayal, to be the footnote in the biography of a man who treated their mother like a disposable commodity. She would not retreat. She would fight. The king wanted to depose his queen. He had forgotten that in chess, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. She would not be a weeping victim in the wings. She would be his judge, his jury, and his executioner, all in one. The setting was Julian's cathedral of power. Aura was a place so exclusive it didn't have a sign, only a whisper of a reputation. To dine there was to announce you were part of the city's true ruling class. The room was a symphony of hushed tones, muted lighting, and the discreet clinking of crystal. Julian was at the head of a long table, holding court. He felt invincible, perched at the peak of his power. The Vanguard merger was his masterpiece, a hostile takeover so audacious it had left Wall Street breathless. Tonight, he was not just a CEO, he was a conquering emperor, surrounded by his generals and the vanquished. And at his side, laughing at his every pronouncement, was Chloe. It clung to her form, accentuating the proud swell of her pregnancy. To the others, she was a vision of wronged, defiant beauty. But to Julian, the color was a psychological blow. It was the exact shade of the dress his mother had been buried in, a funereal color his domineering father had chosen. It was a color he associated with loss, failure, and public shame, a deep-seated trauma Alara had quietly unearthed from his rare, unguarded admissions years ago. Seeing her in it, now, at his moment of ultimate triumph, was like seeing a ghost from his own personal hell. His smile faltered, the blood draining from his face. "Julian," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried an impossible weight, cutting through the silence like a shard of ice. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Chloe, emboldened by champagne and arrogance, let out a small, dismissive laugh. "I think you're mistaken." Chloe sneered, placing a proprietary hand on Julian's arm. "Everything here belongs to him." Alara's gaze drifted to Chloe, cold and dismissive. "I wasn't speaking to the help." The insult was so sharp, so perfectly delivered, it left a visible mark. Chloe flushed a deep, ugly red. Alara's eyes returned to Julian, pinning him to his chair. "You seem to be confused about the nature of ownership, darling. For instance, you believe you own Vance Innovations. A common misconception." Julian found his voice, a low growl of pure fury. "Alara, you are making a scene. Leave. Now." "A scene?" she replied, a humorless smile touching her lips. "No, Julian. I am correcting a clerical error." She took another step into the room. "You see, for the last 12 years, your company's entire market dominance has been based on one piece of proprietary software. The Janus Protocol. The predictive algorithm that made you a billionaire. Your black box." The room was deathly quiet. The board members leaned forward. This was the legendary, impenetrable core of their business. You bought it 12 years ago from a shell corporation called Athena Strategic Solutions for a paltry $5 million, Alara continued, her voice calm and methodical. You thought you were swindling some unknown coder. A prodigy who wanted to remain anonymous, she paused, letting the weight of her words settle. I was an art history major, Julian. That's what I told you. It was mostly true. But my father, the man you never bothered to get to know, was a professor of computer science. And I was his prodigy. Shatter. The word wasn't spoken, but it was the sound of Julian's world breaking apart. Disbelief warred with dawning, sickening horror on his face. The other people at the table looked from her to him, their expressions morphing from confusion to shock, and for some of his rivals, to predatory glee. I am Athena Strategic Solutions, she stated, her voice ringing with absolute authority. I wrote every line of the Janus Code. And our contract, the one your high-priced lawyers never bothered to read closely enough, contains a morality clause. A kill switch, if you will. It can be triggered by gross personal misconduct that threatens the stability of the company. She smiled. A cold, terrifying thing. I wonder if attempting to defraud the chief architect of your core technology and mother of your heir qualifies. This was the detonation. But it wasn't the end. With a smooth, fluid motion, she reached for the pristine white tablecloth. Her hand closed around the edge. You wanted a clean slate, Julian, she whispered, her voice suddenly laced with all the pain and rage she had suppressed. Let's start now. And with a violent, primal scream of catharsis, she yanked. The illusion of civility shattered. A tidal wave of crystal, silver, and fine china cascaded to the floor in a deafening, glorious crash. Wine glasses exploded, splashing blood-red liquid across the pristine marble. Plates of meticulously arranged food became a chaotic ruin. The sound was a thunderclap of destruction, the physical manifestation of Julian's life imploding. He was left sitting amidst the wreckage, drenched in champagne, his face a mask of utter, public ruin. Alara stood for a moment longer, breathing heavily, a lone, regal figure in a field of beautiful destruction. She had not raised her voice beyond a whisper and a single, final scream, yet she had leveled an empire with her words. She turned, her sapphire dress swirling around her, and walked out of the room. She did not run. She did not look back. The entire room, the most powerful people in the city, watched in stunned, absolute silence as the queen, whom they had all underestimated, made her triumphant exit, leaving the fallen king to drown in the ruins of his own making. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. Before the last shard of crystal had been swept from Aura's floor, the story was already spreading, a wildfire tearing through the city's elite. It wasn't just gossip blog fodder, it was a business catastrophe. The tale of the brilliant, spurned wife who was the secret architect of the company was too potent, too Shakespearean to be ignored. News outlets, sensing blood in the water, began digging. Julian Vance was no longer the Midas of tech. He was reframed overnight, cast as the villain, the fool, the titan brought low by his own hubris. The financial repercussions were swift and merciless. The stock for Vance Innovations, built on the myth of Julian's singular genius, plummeted. The Vanguard merger, which had a strict character clause for its key leadership, collapsed before the markets even opened the next day. Billions of dollars in market value evaporated into thin air, a fortune turned to smoke by a single act of defiance. The empire Julian had spent a lifetime building was crumbling, its foundations revealed to be not his genius, but his wife's, and its integrity destroyed by his betrayal. This was the moment the Viper struck. Marcus Thorne, Julian's loyal chief operating officer, the man he trusted implicitly, saw his opportunity. Marcus was the only other person at the company who knew about the Athena Strategic Solutions shell corporation, as he had handled the annual licensing payments. For years, he had harbored a deep, secret resentment, watching Julian take all the credit. Now, with Julian publicly disgraced and the company in freefall, Marcus made his move. He called an emergency board meeting. He presented Julian's public humiliation and the subsequent market collapse as proof of his instability and unfitness to lead. He painted himself as the steady hand needed to guide the company through the storm. The Mistress, Chloe, was unceremoniously fired, a minor piece of collateral damage in a much larger game. The board, terrified of total collapse, voted overwhelmingly. Julian Vance was exiled from his own kingdom, removed as CEO and chairman of the company that bore his name. Stripped of his power, his wife, and his mistress, Julian retreated to the one place that would have him, the cold, silent mausoleum of his penthouse. The gleaming marble and chrome that once felt like symbols of his power now felt like the walls of a pristine prison. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory, roaring with the echoes of his failures. He was a king in exile, haunted by the ghost of his own arrogance. For days, he wandered the cavernous rooms, the shock giving way to a profound, hollow despair. Without his title, his company, his wealth, who was he? He was forced to look at the man in the mirror, stripped of his corporate armor, and he did not recognize the hollowed-out stranger staring back. He was nothing but the sum of his worst mistakes. While Julian's world imploded, Alara executed a strategic retreat. She left the city, turning her back on the chaos she had unleashed. She drove not to a luxury hotel, but to her late grandmother's small, rustic cottage on the coast, a place of salt-laced air and windswept pines. The cottage was the antithesis of the penthouse, small, filled with worn wooden furniture, mismatched books, and the scent of lavender and old paper. It was a place that represented her true self, a self she had packed away to fit into Julian's sterile world. Here, surrounded by memories of a woman of quiet strength, she found her anchor. Her best friend, Sophia, a sharp, pragmatic lawyer, was her first and only visitor, bringing not pity, but a briefcase full of legal strategies and a bottle of non-alcoholic champagne. It was there, in the quiet solitude of the cottage, that Alara unleashed her secret weapon for the second time. She didn't need to shatter glass or pull tablecloths anymore. Her power was quieter, more profound. It was the cool, logical flow of code. She opened a simple laptop on the old oak kitchen table and began to work. She was not just a prodigy-level coder. She was a brilliant architect of systems. Julian had built an empire on her foundation, but she understood every secret room, every hidden passage, every load-bearing wall within it. She began by securing her creation. She accessed the Janus protocol through a master backdoor that only she knew existed, a key she had encoded into the system from its inception. From her humble cottage, she had more control over Vance Innovations than its own board of directors. She spent her days walking on the beach, her hand on her belly, feeling the life within her grow, and her nights shoring up firewalls, optimizing code, and preparing for the next phase. She wasn't just hiding. She was regrouping and rebuilding her power base on her own terms. A week into her retreat, an encrypted file arrived in her inbox from an anonymous source. It was a single audio recording. Her blood ran cold as she listened. It was Marcus Thorne, the new CEO, speaking with an unknown party. He was gloating. He spoke of his plan to systematically dismantle Vance Innovations, sell off the Janus protocol to a foreign competitor, a direct violation of its licensing terms, and walk away with a fortune, leaving the company a hollowed-out shell. He laughed about how he had used Julian's scandal as the perfect cover. Alara was faced with an impossible choice. She could let it happen. She could let Marcus burn the company to the ground, destroying Julian's legacy completely. It was a tempting, poetic justice, but it was also her legacy. It was her creation, the work of her mind. And more importantly, it was the inheritance of her unborn child. To let it fall into the hands of a man like Marcus was a betrayal of her own genius. She looked out at the gray, churning ocean and made a decision. Julian was a fool and a traitor to their marriage, but he was a victim in this corporate coup. He loved the company, however flawed his leadership. She realized, with a sense of grim irony, that the only person who could help her save her company was the man she had just destroyed. The phone call was brief and brutally efficient. Julian, lost in a fog of whiskey and self-pity, answered on the 10th ring. Alara's voice, crisp and clear, cut through his haze. "Julian, we have a problem. Your company is being stolen by your most trusted friend. I have proof. If you want to save what's left of it, meet me tomorrow. Noon." The Central Public Library. She didn't wait for a response. She just hung up. The act of giving him an order, of summoning him to a neutral, public space, was a final, quiet confirmation of the inverted power dynamic. He arrived looking like a ghost of his former self. His expensive suit was rumpled, his eyes were bloodshot, and the arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a tentative, almost fragile hesitation. They met not in a private room, but at a simple table in the main reading hall, surrounded by the quiet dignity of books. It was her turf. She laid out the situation with cold, irrefutable logic, playing the audio recording from her laptop. His face went from despair to a new, white-hot fury, the anger of a man betrayed not just by his own folly, but by a brother. For the first time, he looked at Alara not as a wife or an accessory, but as an ally. A formidable, terrifying ally. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice raspy. "I want my company back," she said simply. "And you are going to help me get it." Their fragile alliance was forged in the hushed silence of the library. It was a business arrangement, a temporary truce in their personal war. The final showdown was scheduled for the emergency shareholder meeting Marcus had called to approve the sale of the company's key assets. It was there, in a sterile hotel ballroom, that Alara and Julian made their stand. Julian, cleaned up and wearing a sober suit, spoke first, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance, replaced with a raw, humble sincerity. He confessed his personal failings to the shareholders, but pivoted to expose Marcus's treachery. Then, Alara took the podium. She calmly introduced herself not as Julian Vance's estranged wife, but as the founder of Athena Strategic Solutions and the chief architect of the Janus Protocol. She played Marcus's recorded confession for the entire room. The effect was electric. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. She presented irrefutable evidence of Marcus's conspiracy, of his plan to defraud them all. The vote of no confidence in Marcus was unanimous. He was escorted out by security, his face a mask of disbelief and ruin. A new order was established in that moment. The board, desperate and humbled, offered Julian his CEO position back. He declined. Instead, he made a counterproposal. He would serve on an advisory committee, but the new chair of the board, with ultimate authority, should be the one person who truly understood the company's value. All eyes turned to Alara. The power dynamic had been permanently, officially, and publicly inverted. 2 months later, Alara gave birth. The delivery was long and difficult, but she was not alone. Julian was there, not as a powerful tycoon, but as a quiet, terrified, and supportive presence. He held her hand, wiped her brow, and when their daughter was born, he wept with a broken, profound relief. The birth was not just the arrival of their child. It was a symbol of the death of their old life and the birth of a fragile, new potential. They named her Athena. A year passed. A new normal settled over their lives, one defined not by luxury, but by authenticity. Alara ran the company with a quiet, decisive brilliance, her leadership celebrated for its innovation and integrity. She lived not in the penthouse, but in a warm, light-filled brownstone in the city. Julian lived in a modest apartment a few blocks away. The penthouse, that cold mausoleum, had been sold, its proceeds put into a trust for their daughter. His visits were frequent, but they were focused on Athena. He learned to change diapers, to fix a leaky faucet in Alara's kitchen, to bring groceries without being asked. The silence between them was no longer a weapon, but a comfortable space, filled with the shared, unspoken language of co-parents building something new from the wreckage of the old. One evening, as he was about to leave, he paused at the door. "Alara," he said, his voice soft, his gaze direct for the first time in years. "I know I can never earn back what I threw away. Your trust, your love. I don't expect that, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn your respect. And your friendship." He finally understood. His quest for redemption was not about getting back what he had lost, but about becoming a man worthy of what he now had. A second chance, a daughter, and the quiet respect of the woman he had so spectacularly failed to see. The story of Julian and Alara serves as a powerful testament to the fact that true power is not about control, dominance, or the accumulation of wealth. It is found in quiet intelligence, in unyielding integrity, and in the inner strength to remake one's world from the ashes of betrayal. Redemption, as Julian learned, is not a destination one arrives at, but a long, difficult road of accountability and service. It is the quiet, daily work of rebuilding what was broken, not with grand gestures, but with humble acts of truth. It reminds us that underestimating the quiet ones is the most profound folly, for within their silence often lies the strategic genius to command the boardrooms and win the wars we never even knew they were fighting.